Hello, everyone. Our today's guest is Johan Norberg. You can find his socials on the episode description. Johan, thanks for joining.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Yes, let's talk about progress, degrowth, and global capitalism and open societies. So, to give a little context, it seems that when you were young, you were quite anti-industrialist and a leftist anarchist. What was it that put you on this entirely different path and led you to discover human progress?
Yeah, you're right. This is actually why I'm quite obsessed with the whole idea of human progress. The fact that I didn't used to believe in it. I used to think that there must have been some good old days in the past when we lived in a better way, more in harmony with one another and with nature. And that made me very concerned and angry with the modern world, the post sort of industrial revolution world. Everything from pollution to big business to various forms of modern lifestyles. The thing that set me on a different trajectory was reading history, really, and the history of my ancestors in northern Sweden as well, some 150 years ago, because that gave me the sense that there were no good old days back then. They led very hard, tough lives in poverty, in hunger. When there was bad weather, there was a crop failure, and they were starving.
Yeah.
So they didn't live ecologically. They died ecologically at a very young age. Child mortality was some 50%. So that forced me to think about, okay, so what sets my life apart from their lives? Why is it that I get to experience literacy, economic growth, innovation, and not just take all of that for granted, but really think about what made that possible? And that got me interested in everything from the philosophical enlightenment to modern free market capitalism to modern freedom, and to cherish those ideals.
Yes, great. And you very recently, like 2 weeks ago, just published a new book, Peak Human, What We Can Learn from History's Greatest Civilizations. Can you make a very brief summary of what this new book approaches?
Yeah, it's really an attempt to look at history and not just all the bad things in history, because yes, there was lots of crime, poverty, and misfortune in human history, but there has also been creative explosions in various places. The things that we now call golden ages, from ancient Athens and early Roman Republic to the Italian Renaissance, China and the Song dynasty, and so on. I wanted to really talk about what made them, at least relative to their contemporaries, great civilizations with innovation, with economic exploration and human flourishing. And what made that possible? Why did it end? And are there any lessons that we can draw from that today when we're fighting for our civilization?
Right. Yeah. You talked about human flourishing there. What's for you a story of human flourishing?
Well, if we talk about the sort of macro indicators, I would say that the story is one about imitation and innovation, the fact that these civilizations learned from other ideas, other methods, other discoveries, often because they were trade-based, so they could constantly learn from outsiders. But then also some openness back home for surprises. They needed some rule of law, some freedom of expression, some economic freedom in order to start to use those ingredients to innovate themselves. That led to societies that were open to something new and exciting. But then if you look at it from a more individual perspective, if we're talking about human flourishing, I think what set these societies apart for real was that they were at some point beginning to change their identity, the way in which they looked at themselves and began to become cultures of optimism or hope in some way, because every innovation, every attempt to do things in new ways is always difficult, it's hard, it's controversial. But at some point they began to see that this works. And then they were inspired by others who came up with everything from new expressions of art to new technological methods. And that gave people the sense that it might work if I do this, and I might even be rewarded in status and economically if I try new things. And this, I think, is an incredibly important part of human flourishing, the sense that you have individual human agency, that you might actually change things. You might explore new things, and you're responsible for the outcomes. So you work hard, you get this sense that you're a real human actor who can thrive, but there is also risk involved. So you'd better focus on what you're doing and assume personal responsibility. If you do that, I think that's a key ingredient in a good, healthy human life, feeling like you're in the driver's seat of your own life.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, and what narrative shifts are most urgent if we want to reclaim a really true sense of optimism, and what personal practices help most people align with that story?
Well, I think something that's very timely right now is to give up on the culture of victimhood, the idea that everything that happens is somebody else's fault, which is something it's very pervasive in our culture today. It's also something that politicians of all sides constantly talk about. They say, you have problems, it's somebody else's fault, I will fix it for you. And that's terrible. That, I think, is detrimental to all this sense of just human agency, of being in the driver's seat, of being the one who makes the greatest difference in your own life. No matter what kind of solutions others come up with in your own life, that's a bad thing, because it's somebody else in the driver's seat telling you how to lead your life and how to move forward. And we have to return to some sense of this human responsibility, that you are the most important actor in your own life.
Yes, yeah. And I, I get this idea that some people that look at people that follow progress and capitalism think that they don't really care about the environment, but that's not correct at all, and you've made some statements about that. So what do you propose to environment, to have a better environment as we move forward in the progress of human life?
Yeah, it's interesting how people always say that about free market capitalism, while at the same time, every time we've experimented with socialist ideals and the communist economies of East and Central Europe, they were the ones who really destroyed resources and destroyed nature. Even Soviet economists in the 1980s were shocked to see that American factories managed to produce the same things with about half of the resources and the energy that they needed, partly because in a socialist economy, if they did something that was deemed essential, they got the resources and the energy the electricity that they needed. Whereas in a capitalist economy, these are costs, or every input. So they constantly have to think hard about what they are using and what they are doing. And if you come up with a way of using less aluminium for a can of soda or tin, you save enormous resources, and then everybody else has to do the same thing. So I think that the way to save the environment is to constantly use the imagination and innovation of entrepreneurs, and to use less resources and put less pollution into the atmosphere and into nature. We can see that around the world. Some 40 countries have been able to reduce their absolute emissions of carbon dioxide as well. And those just happens to be the richest, the most capitalist and freest economies on the planet.
Okay, yeah. And going back to human agency, what emergent forces keep you confident that the agency that you write and talk about will endure into the mid 21st century?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not convinced because I think this depends on our choices and the policies that we promote. But as long as people have some sort of freedom to constantly experiment and innovate and adapt to changes, unpredictable changes, they will be able to do that. And I think, I mean, just looking at some of the past crises and disasters that we've experienced, like the pandemic,
Mm,
I think that the greatest lesson that we can learn is how incredibly imaginative people are if they are free to adapt to it all. Because we all thought that the world was basically going to end when people aren't even allowed to leave their own homes. We'd better stock up on canned food and toilet paper. But you saw that all these goods were back on shelves in a matter of days, sometimes even just hours. And that's because we adapt, because there wasn't one great plan to do all of this, but millions of small plans by the real experts, the business people, workers, households who react to price signals, to shortages, and come up with innovative solutions, tweaking manufacturing, rerouting supplies, making do with whatever people came to the factories or the fields in the morning. I mean, if they can do that and get us through this in much better shape than anyone would have expected, to me it suggests that the ultimate resource out there, as the economist Julian Simon once put it, is the human brain and the
mm.
ways in which they constantly adapt and come up with strange, exotic, unpredictable solutions to all our problems. Then we'll be able to do that in the future as well.
Right. But you think that, our system is made to provide entrepreneurs to provide entrepreneurs a better life quality than people that rely to conform?
Not necessarily. There's obviously, I mean, being an innovator is hard. Putting something completely new that has never existed in the world out there is incredibly difficult. It's hard work. And it often fails. It's like walking on a minefield, as one entrepreneur put it to me,
Mm.
because you don't know where the mines are hidden. It could be failures in your business, in the technology, or consumers changing their minds. But we're also making it more difficult through many of our policies, through regulation that makes
Mm.
it harder, through taxes that makes the potential reward much more difficult, and often makes it more difficult to get capital for your business in the short run. It's easier to blend in and to behave just like everybody else rather than walking out onto that minefield. The problem is that somebody's got to do it, because on the other side of that minefield awaits more human knowledge, technological capacity, and incredible economic rewards for everybody. So we have to get people out there. And I think the best way to get more people to explore this is to entice them with economic rewards, letting them reap the economic rewards, the profits of the wealth that they are creating for us. Profit is not something that you take from others. It's what little you get to keep of the value that you create for others. And then they only engage with you if they think that they are better off if they do it. So we are going to have to step out of the way and allow people to take these crazy risks in their own lives, with their own business, often heavily indebted, to help to reward all of us.
Right. Yeah, and you talked about taxes there. I think that's a proof that they don't really want creative minds, because if they did, they wouldn't tax as much as other other fields, and they keep taxing entrepreneurs. But I don't know if it's really the way they want.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's a combination of not understanding the value that's being created there, not just for the entrepreneur, for everybody
Right.
else. I mean, we are the great winners. We who don't take those risks, but just get the increased wealth and the technological capacity from these entrepreneurs. In a way, it shouldn't just be zero taxation; it should really be negative taxation because they're really just rewarding all of us. William Nordhaus, the Nobel laureate, pointed out when looking at innovations in the US economy over some 150 years that the entrepreneurs who create them only capture 2% of the value.
Oof.
So the rest of us who lie on the sofa just watching Netflix, we got 98%. It's a pretty good deal, capitalism for us. And I don't think that people really appreciate that and the risks that they are taking to create that value. But I also think from political decision makers, when they create their tax systems, it's like that classical bank robber who was asked, why do you rob banks? Well, it's because that's where the money is. They don't really think of the long-term consequences for incentives and for the wealth of our society. They just think that, oh, look, there's wealth over there. Let's just grab it. And obviously it has the same consequences as bank robbers. You reduce the incentives to accumulate wealth.
Yes. What does capitalism means for you?
What capitalism means for me?
Yeah.
Well, to me, this is not just one of all those systems in history that sort of comes from a blueprint, a plan to organize our economic behavior. This is an emergent system out of decentralized actions of millions and millions of people who constantly interact. And that sets it apart from everything else. It's not dependent on the contents of one person's or one planner's brain, but instead it's the consequence of the actions of millions of free people moving about in unpredictable ways. And therefore they also interact in a voluntary way. It's better, it's smarter, it's more efficient because it makes use of the knowledge of the local knowledge and individual creativity of more people. But it's also the only moral economic system because it's then dependent on negotiations, on deals where you can offer people something, you can try to engage with them, but they always have the right to turn you down and go elsewhere. And that's why it's the first system where you can only get rich if you enrich others, if you give them something that they think is more valuable than not engaging with you. So, economic systems historically were always based on slavery or feudalism or socialism or fascism, always something taking advantage of others against their will and exploiting the wealth creators. Whereas this is the first system which actually provides people with the individual dignity and the rights of going about their business in their own way, and therefore also giving them agency and moral worth.
Yes. And is capitalism making the world more equal?
Yes, it does, as long as people get capitalism, because, I mean, the world is a very, very deeply unequal place, but the inequality of the world is really based on the inequality in the distribution of capitalism. Those who have capitalism, they grow rich, whereas those who do not have capitalism, they stay poor. So obviously you can also see that it creates inequalities. If only certain regions, certain areas get this freedom to accumulate wealth, whereas others don't. But in this era of globalization, since the 1990s, where we have had more free trade, at least, than before, where digital technology and container shipping means that it's easier to get ideas and goods across borders. You can use the knowledge, the technology of others, and you can also provide goods and resources to them. this has actually been the first era, at least since the Industrial Revolution, where we've seen a decline in global inequality. Even those who are very worried about inequality, like economists like Branko Milanovic, points out that since the turn of the millennium, we've seen a convergence of incomes across the globe for the first time, at least in 150 years, perhaps even as long as 500 years. And that's because more people in poor countries have been able to participate in global capitalism, so that for the first time they can make rapid economic growth and innovation possible.
Right. And you often talk about over regulation, especially in the West. Where is the optimal boundary between necessary regulation and entrepreneurial freedom when dealing with existential risks like AI or biotech?
Yes, that's a great question, because it's difficult to see the exact boundaries, I would say. I think my overall principle is fairly clear, and it is that we shouldn't have regulations that try to avoid any kind of mistake, any kind of problem, any potential abuse, because any kind of technology or business model can create problems and unintended consequences. And in that case would block everything. And that would be a more dangerous world, because we need this technological capacity to deal with problems as well. So where do governments step in? I think they step in when we create negative external effects on others, when we do damage to other people, when we impose costs on them somehow. Then those costs should be internalized, so that we who caused them are forced to pay up for it and compensate those who are exposed to it, and block it if the damage is sufficiently big. That doesn't tell us exactly where that boundary lies. I think this is something that we actually sometimes have to wait and see how the technology, how these business models evolve. I think one of the problems right now with the European Union regulation is that they try to take every potential future consequence into consideration when they come up with AI regulation, for example. And that's problematic, because it means that, especially for small upstarts, it's incredibly, you can't foresee everything. And then the reporting requirements and the regulations will be imposed such a high burden that only the big businesses will succeed. And this is one reason why, Americans and Chinese, they're proud of their AI businesses, whereas we in Europe, we're proud of our AI regulations because we don't have those businesses, because we've chased them away. I think it might make more sense to have these basic principles in place, but then allow both courts and decision makers to follow what happens and see how the technology evolves before we sort of block everything in advance.
Right. Okay, and does this borderless tech revolution require kind of new forms of democratic governance? And if so, what kind of institutions would genuinely hold global corporations accountable?
I don't think that governance in itself or ways of governing is the way to keep them in check, no matter if we're experimenting with some sort of direct democracy or participatory versions or representative democracy. We are going to have to impose certain rules and principles on these businesses, making sure that the external consequences are compensated for. And most of all, the most important thing there is to allow free entry into these markets. That's the most important check on any kind of business, be it tech business or anything else, making sure that they cannot abuse their position, because if they do, somebody else will always challenge the incumbents. And making sure that we have this free entry, this openness for challenges, which includes free trade, which makes it possible for outsiders to come in and challenge them. I think that's the most important check on any kind of power.
Okay. And you are an advocate for open borders, right?
Yes, I am. I think that the case for migration and being allowed to cross borders, pick up an employment in another country, the argument is the same as the argument for trade, that we benefit from access to more people, more productivity, more talent with whom to collaborate with and to buy and sell ideas and goods and services from them, with the added bonus of migration. If it works out, I mean, again, it's picking up employment. It's not being crossing borders and ending up on welfare and ending up in an enclave. That's not what I'm talking about. But if you're allowed to cross borders, to participate, to work, it also means that we have one added bonus, and that's the fact that people are close to you who have other experiences, other talents, and look at our problems with their own background. So we have the added possibility of combining ideas in novel ways, coming up with new, strange, exotic things, like, Turkish migrants who come to Germany with their
Mhm.
background, their knowledge, combining that with the state of the knowledge in German universities, so that they could come up with with BioNTech, which has been one of the most successful biotech drug firms in modern history. That doesn't happen if you aren't allowed to meet and to compare notes and to learn from each other.
Right. Yeah, I think closed borders are the number one factor for the discrimination we see today, which is huge. Um, but what is the strongest case for open societies? And what's the most vulnerable aspect that leaders should never ignore?
Yeah, the open societies, when we talk about it, it means that they are a work in progress. They can continue to evolve. Any kind of closed society, whether it be by closing borders and closing off trade or closing off new ideas, means that they are finished. They have to make do with whatever knowledge, whatever plan they had to begin with. And if that plan wasn't perfect, well, then neither is the society. The only way to improve your society is to allow it to grow and to constantly allow your millions of citizens to constantly learn, to experiment, to experience feedback from others and adapt what they're doing and coming up with something new. And I think that's the only way to allow your society to continue to be dynamic, to continue to grow, and also to deal with all the surprises that nature and the world will throw at us, whether it be new pandemics or new geopolitical rivals who are threatening us militarily. We need that openness to more brains who think hard about those problems. And that's the thing that our decision makers and voters should never forget, that it's easy to look at the state of the art knowledge, the best knowledge we have today, and try to impose a perfect plan according to that or make something mandatory. But that's also the best way to shut off all future progress, because in that
Mm.
case you won't see the benefits from the added learning curve, the new things that we constantly discover. That, to me, is the best case for open societies that there is.
Okay, so open societies aren't utopias?
No, I would not say that, because at least if you talk about utopias in literature, it's usually a very detailed description of a perfect society in which everybody is happy according to some specific plan. I don't think we have that. I think that the way in which we hope for the future is really the hope that we haven't experienced the best ideas yet. the best stories haven't been told, the best joke hasn't been thought out, and the best ways of coming up with everything from insuring us against risks and disasters, the great expressions of art, the most smartest business models that will benefit us all, they haven't been explored and discovered yet. I think that's the best case for hope. That's the best case for optimism. And in a way, it's an anti-utopia because it does not tell us what it'll be. It sets its hope to the very idea that no one knows so far. So that's why we can hope for an even better future.
Okay, yeah. And what's the greatest risk globalization faces today?
Well, I think there are two great risks, one external and one internal. The greatest external risk is that we have authoritarian governments that are trying to destroy and threaten independent states and democratic societies like China, like Russia. There is the risk that we will end up that they will not just try to destroy neighboring states like Ukraine and Taiwan, but that will end up in a military conflict that will really tear our world apart. So that there's that danger. On the other hand, if we can avoid a military apocalypse, I think free societies will always benefit, will always thrive in the long run because they are more innovative. But then the greatest risks come from internal forces that we might think that we in Sweden or Portugal or the United States begin to give up on the idea of an open world order, of open societies. We think the world is dangerous, so we shut ourselves in, away from it. And unfortunately, then we will lose that close the tap of new ideas, new technologies that might have helped us to deal with future threats and problems. So often, I mean, one historian's put it in this brutal way that societies, they die because of murder or because of suicide. And most often it is suicide, the fact that they turn off the taps of future growth and innovation.
Okay, yeah, I like that. What would the capitalism of the future look like if it was measured by meaning or dignity rather than just the outputs? And how do we begin shifting the narrative today?
Yeah, that's an important question because it's not just about capitalism is not just about capital, it's not just
Right.
about wealth. It is also about how it constantly incentivizes us to think of how we can do things better tomorrow than we did today. And not just in an abstract way, but in how can we come up with better ways of satisfying the needs and the demand of other people, of strangers tomorrow than we do today, which is a beautiful not just wealth creating machine, but a beautiful well-being machine. It's good for the world, it's good for others, but I think it is, compared to every other potential system, good for ourselves because it incentivizes us to use our own potential as smart and as clever as we can possibly come up with ways of doing it, to unleash our best efforts constantly. And we're not just always, hopefully, economically rewarded if we do that in a good way, but this is how we have been developed, evolutionary speaking, to exploit our efforts. We feel good if we exercise, not just physically, but also mentally, to come up with better ways of using our skills and our potential. And that, to me, is really the very heart and soul of capitalism.
Wow, yeah, I like that. Let's talk about degrowth and the moral tensions of prosperity. Um, what do you think about degrowth?
Oh, I think it's a horrible, horrible idea. I, I think it's the most stupid idea that smart people have come up with, because there are a lot of smart scholars who constantly talk about how this is the way of saving the world. Um, I think it's incredibly dangerous because growth is not just economic growth, it's having more capacity tomorrow than we have today. And we need that in order to thrive, in order to solve difficult, unpredictable problems in the future. But we also need that in order to make it possible for different groups to benefit simultaneously. If we have zero growth, or even worse, degrowth, it means that no person, no group can ever be better off unless others are worse off. This is the perfect way to create civil warfare, to create tribal warfare, because you have to fight against other groups in order to get something, rather than allowing all boats to be lifted by a rising tide. So it's dangerous in that way. But it's also the case, I would add, I mean, this is often presented as a way of protecting the planet and the environment by doing less in the future. You know, we just tried that. The pandemic was an unintentional experiment in degrowth. We
Mm.
grounded all the flights. We stopped people from even going into office and factories in the morning. We shut down trade. We shut down production. And at a huge economic cost. For a brief moment in time, some 50 million people were thrown back into extreme poverty because we did this. Did that save the planet? Well, you know, how much did we reduce carbon dioxide emissions in the year 2020? By no more than 6% globally.
Mm.
So it really didn't do much to help us against global warming. To reach the Paris Climate Accords in that way until 2030, we would need one pandemic every year without any kind of economic rebound in between. So it's not the way to protect the planet, it's the way to destroy human well-being and create tribal warfare.
Okay, and do you think it could ever be reframed from degrowth to enough growth with justice?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yeah. Do you think degrowth could ever be reframed from degrowth to enough growth with justice?
I'm sorry, I just don't get the question.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Can
So
you
you were
rephrase?
talking about the pandemics, and I think you've been using pandemic lockdowns as their model, and also argued that growth saved lives. So how would you challenge the moral core of the growth, and could it ever be reframed from degrowth to enough growth with justice?
All right. I mean, listen, we don't need growth in your individual life. You can stop trying to achieve something better or more valuable to other people tomorrow than today. Um, in a way, that's what we do if we uh, don't move to a better paying, more high productivity job, or we move to a quieter area when we reduce our working time, and that's fine. But you can only do that once we've achieved a certain level of wealth so that everything doesn't come
Mm.
tumbling down and we don't end up in poverty and hunger if we do. So, in a way, that kind of degrowth is dependent on growth as well. The problem, if we do this on a societal level, is that we could think of doing it at a very high economic level. We're already satisfied with everything. But the problem is we always face new problems. We will always face something new. Might face a new pandemic or a new military threat, so that we have to arm ourselves against that. Or it might just be that our solutions create other unintended consequences that we have to deal with. We come up with antibiotics to kill microorganisms, but then they become resistant. And then we need more wealth and technology to deal with that.
Please. Yeah, I think it was like 2 years ago that it was created, the first degree in degrowth, which is ridiculous. Uh,
Right.
why do you think there's academic interest in fields like degrowth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that there is some sort of despair in some circles when it comes to environmental challenges, thinking that there is no way out and the only way to do it is by doing less and having degrowth. But I also think that there's a more sinister thing in a way. Once upon a time, people who were critical of capitalism said that this was because capitalism is such a wasteful system. Socialism would be much more productive and
Mm.
create more wealth. Then it turned out it didn't create more wealth, much less. It was horrible. But they said, yeah, but still, it's better for the poor in the society. But now we've learned that it's in countries that have opened up to the global economy where we've seen this tremendous reduction in global poverty by some 3/4 in 30 years. So then I think there's some sort of resignation among some anti-capitalists. They just go, okay, in that case, the problem is that people become too rich and the poverty reduction is too great. Let's make a virtue out of necessity and say that degrowth is the way to save the planet. So in a way, it's like, the best way to always reach the target is to shoot first and then call whatever you hit the target. And that's one
Mm.
part of the appeal of degrowth, I think.
Okay. And why is capitalism and growth still your core answer to climate disruption? And what would have to be true for you to take degrowth more seriously?
To me, it's the simple case of looking at previous environmental problems, looking at the data that the countries that have managed to reduce the great pollutants, the six classical local pollutants in the US, in the EU, some 90% since the 1990s, things like sulfur
Mm.
dioxide. They didn't do it by degrowth. The countries that have failed to achieve growth, they've instead continued to use the oldest technologies and the oldest factories and machineries. It took better, greener technologies to do it. And I think we can see the same thing when we look around the world at those who manage to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions. It's not the poor countries using old technologies, but richer countries using more modern, greener technologies.
Mm.
What would have to change for me to take it seriously? I would think some sort of reversal of that correlation so that richer
Okay.
countries continue to increase their pollution, whereas the poorest ones did not. But that's not what we're seeing now.
Right. Yeah. And what's the difference between human growth and human flourishing?
Well, if you're talking about growth, it usually sounds like it's an economic growth. It's
Mm.
adapting, becoming more productive, becoming wealthier. And that's not a bad thing, but it's not necessarily the same thing. For flourishing, I think it takes also the sense that you are really creating the sense, the self-perception that you're exploiting your full potential, your skills and efforts in a way that feels meaningful. I think it's easier to do that in a growing society than in a poorer one, but it also takes some added human agency and decisions.
Okay, yeah. What's your favorite book?
Oh, that's a good question. In all genres, I think that. Oh, I have I have many favorite books. I think uh, when it comes to novels, I think Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead is a great exploration of human creativity
Mm,
in the life of
yeah.
individual human beings. I think that some of Mario Vargas Llosa's books, the
Mhm.
Peruvian author and Nobel laureate, his novels are some of the greatest that I've ever read. So are Dostoevsky's when it comes to exploring human psychology as well, like the Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment. So those are some of my fiction favorites. When it comes to nonfiction, oh, I have so many great books that I keep returning to. One that I recently returned to that contains so much more than it seems at first sight is Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which is not
Uh,
just about the wealth of nations, it's
yeah.
really about human nature as well and human history. It's a great work where you can find more than first meets the eye.
Okay. And what's the most important thing you've learned in your life?
I think the most important thing I've learned in my life is is to learn from failure, to
Mm.
understand that if you don't fail, you haven't taken enough risks in your life, because every form of learning and discovery process is a trial and error process, and this is the most important but also the most difficult lesson, to realize that when you've done something wrong, it's really a data point that's incredibly valuable to you in
Mm.
moving onwards in life. Failure is only the way for success to try to be reborn, to be born in a greater way than if you had succeeded originally.
Yeah, that's pretty similar with Karl Popper's ideas that I admire a lot, and David Deutsch.
Quite right. Two great thinkers, I think, both Deutsch and Popper, who understood and understand this on both individual level and a societal level, that the world is a journey of exploration, and it comes with risks, downsides, and failures as well, and we need them too.
Yeah, exactly. What's the meaning of life?
I think I'm paraphrasing Aristotle now when I'm
Okay.
saying that, the meaning of life is not a specific destination. It's not a place to end up, but it's a way of journeying. It's a way of traveling to basically any kind of destination. If you do it in a way that makes you feel like you're exploring, you're learning, you're growing, you are making use of your resources, your intellect, your full perception, and you continue to think that something exciting might happen around the next corner. Well, that to me is the meaning of life. And then it doesn't really matter that much where you end up as an individual or as a society. If you find a way to manage that way of traveling in a way that feels like it's constantly meaningful and exhilarating, then you've led a good life.
Yes, I love that. Johan, thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed and appreciate your energy and time. And see you next time.
Thank you very much. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a
See
nice
you.
day. See you. Bye.